Thank you all so much for joining us for today's event. My name is Nick, and I'm one of the events hosts here at Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events and by visiting our website, powells.com. You can also check on our live events if you live close to us. If you don't already do so, please follow us on our social media channels via Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Jeff VanderMeer in conversation with Hank Green, talking about Jeff's new book, Hummingbird Salamander. Jeff VanderMeer is the author of Dead Astronauts, Born, and the Southern Reach trilogy, the first volume of which, Annihilation, won the Nebula Award and the Shirley Jackson Award, and was adapted into a movie by Alex Garland, starring Natalie Portman. His newest book, Hummingbird Salamander, in his newest work, The Hummingbird Salamander, the security consultant Jane Smith receives an envelope with a key to a storage unit that holds a taxidermied hummingbird and clues leading to a taxidermied salamander. Silvina, the dead woman who left the note, was a reputed ecoterrorist and the daughter of an Argentine industrialist. By taking the hummingbird from the storage unit, Jane sets in motion a series of events that quickly spiral beyond her control. Soon, she and her family are in danger with few allies to help her make sense of the true scope of the peril. Is the only way to safety in following Silvina's footsteps. Hummingbird Salamander is Jeff VanderMeer at his dazzling cinematic best, wrapping profound questions about climate change, identity, and the world we inhabit into a tightly plotted tale full of unexpected twists. Jeff will be joined in conversation by Hank Green, author of An Absolutely Remarkable Thing and a Beautifully Foolish Endeavor. Today's event will include an audience Q&A, so please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. As well, if someone has typed a question you'd also like to know the answer to, please upvote that particular question by clicking the thumbs up button. Lastly, support Jeff and Powell's by purchasing a copy of his book from us. A link to buy Hummingbird Salamander will be shared in the chat a couple of times. Jeff and Hank, thank you so much for joining us. It's a thrill to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Jeff. Oh, just now it's just a logo. Jeff.
Yeah.
It's great. It's great to talk to you. I think that we've never interacted in real time, only through the mediation of Twitter.
Yes.
And
yeah.
I'm going to talk about Twitter in a little bit because I think that I certainly have a lot of thoughts that I need to work out. So I appreciate getting chances to talk about it. But I read this book a while back, and you know, for as soon as I heard like a synopsis like that, I was like, I need to know about this. And what it was clear to me, I think, felt clear, is that you must be a fan of noir fiction. Am I right? Did I make that up?
No, you didn't make that up, to the point where I it's hard for me to even like kind of cite influences, because I watch and have read so much of it, and even took a job with Publishers Weekly just reviewing mysteries and thrillers many years ago, when I knew I was going to.
That's the best training, being forced to read everything that gets published.
Well, I knew I wanted to write noir, and I'd read it, but I thought, this way I'm going to, exactly. The incoming will not be what I picked out, right? Yeah. So I get exposed to a lot of different things. So you'd be absolutely correct about that. And I think it's useful when talking about climate crisis fiction, maybe, or it was for me, because I feel like there's a darkness to noir that doesn't feel dark to a noir reader.
Right.
And I think that in a way was meant to balance the seriousness of parts of the novel. A different kind of darkness.
right. Because like noir is almost fatalistic, is like a genre convention, and fatalism. So it's interesting, like the interplay between the fatalism of the genre convention and the fatalism of like of reality. And I actually wonder about that from like it could be easy, if you aren't familiar with the genre conventions, to think, this is a very sort of fatalistic novel about the future. But it's like, well, that's whereas if you are, you might be more sort of like expecting all of that. But it does make me wonder, it makes me worry that people are like, Jeff VanderMeer thinks that we're doomed, like after reading the book. But it also makes me want to ask the question, does Jeff VanderMeer think that we're doomed?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I'm always very separate from the characters. Sometimes I share their views, their point of view more than others. And even in this one where Silvina is the more like experienced environmentalist, I'm not necessarily ascribing my point of view to her particular solutions. What what I'm saying? It's like you really examine this book carefully.
That's good.
But well, I mean, it's funny because I feel like this is a book that can be seen a lot of different ways depending on what your knowledge is of even things like geoengineering and how you feel about activism and certain kinds of activism. It's kind of like it holds a mirror up to the reader in a sense. But yeah, do I think things are doomed? No, in the sense that I don't think it's a thing where, I think people want it to be one or the other. They want us to say that we're not past the point of being able to be hopeful, or we are. And I think it's just not, that's not the way it is. It's simply that right. The more that we put in the work, and I don't just mean the individual me, but the systems that we operate under, to mitigate this, the more people are going to come out the other end, not suffering, not dying, et cetera, et cetera. So,
right.
So I'm more about like a kind of clear practicality, but then the novels are like laboratories when they're dealing with climate fiction, things like that. It's like what happens when you put the human personality and illogical systems into a work of fiction, and you're trying to look at different possibilities, right? So that's really the way I view it. And the noir thing was one thing as a counterpoint. The other was simply to kind of showcase the beauty of the natural world. Now, in another novel, it might have been something really gorgeous about human achievement, right? But in this particular novel, that counterpoint seemed to make sense. So the Hummingbird I invested pretty heavily in making that to be a kind of a counterpoint of beauty and lightness in the novel. That also represents the fact that I don't think things are necessarily doomed, but that we do, I do feel like we are up against the wall, and we have to make vast systemic changes right now to really get out of this. So
yeah, it's a very tricky balance that I think that has been an ongoing conversation in climate activism for a long time, and I think is sort of more. It's being discussed more now, which I think is good. Like, where is that balance between being like, these problems are so big that like we are already in a situation where it's going to result in the deaths of many people, like that is true. But like there isn't a like I listened to a podcast with you where you said some version of the apocalypse is inevitable, and I like that's it is important to understand that apocalypse, we imagine it, we like to imagine it, in the story, it's sort of like a binary switch. Either there's like thriving or there's zero people left. And in fact, it like much will be.
It's going to be something, right? Exactly. And but I again, I have a certain amount of practicality in how I want to view this that doesn't really buy into dystopia, just utopia, into binaries. I just want the facts, and so sometimes the facts are pretty dire. And my concern too is that if we are too hopeful, in a sense where we're not actually analyzing the data and working from the actual facts, then we get into situations where we're basically like greenwashing or whatever else, right?
Yeah, where it's just like, hey, everybody, let's come along on the journey with us, and like we'll solve these problems. Humans are amazing. That's what we do. And
we always have done this, so we can do it now.
Yeah, right? So far we haven't put ourselves into extinction, and we've had these tools that we have for like 100 years. That's a long time, right?
Right, exactly. And I was actually curious on your end how you balance that. I mean, because you do really clear messaging that I think is very effective, because it's about getting results. It's about not being frozen, which I really respect. But how do you balance that without being too hopeful too?
It's super hard. Like the hardest part of that is you have to adjust your messaging for the audience you're talking to. And the internet doesn't want you to, not that it doesn't want you to, it has it's hard to do that, because something that you create and you're trying to create it for this audience can easily be pulled out and given to this other audience, and it looks very different to them. But like, that's a lot of how I try and balance that, is that when I feel like I'm talking to people who are new to the conversation, or who are young and maybe are their first exposure to like, you know, we always have that moment where we realize the world doesn't have to be the way that it is when we're teenagers usually. And when they're having that first exposure to that reality, and maybe that exposure is, and also we've been telling you for the last 10 years that we have to do this in the next 10 years or we're fucked. That like, they're like, oh, so we're fucked. Like, and like, you know, my, so I'm trying to adjust the conversation based on the, and I also try and sort of lead with the problem I'm trying to solve. Not like saying this is the problem I'm trying to solve, but like trying to make people aware that of like the concern and how I'm countering that concern. But one of the things that I like to say is, you know, I'm grateful and to be able to say this now that like I've been doing this work for 20 years ish. And I have seen things get better in some ways. Like I think that the problem is being taken much more seriously. Places where there are a lot of climate voters have instituted a lot more climate legislation that has had an effect on the market, on the per capita CO2 emissions, on like have had real effects. Like you see it's a big difference between Florida and California in terms of actual things that are getting done, despite the fact that it's a fairly similar kind of state and a fairly similar kind of population. So the so like being able to talk about both that progress has occurred and that we are not in a situation where like any amount of there isn't like an amount of work that we could do that would be too much.
Right. No, absolutely. And you know, I think of that issue of the messaging in a way in terms of the fact that I've got two characters in Hummingbird Salamander, one of whom is a novice to environmental issues. Yeah, there's only so much information Jane can really absorb about the crisis because she's not really been aware of it. And then Silvina, on the other hand, is probably too jaded about it. Yeah. But then also I like the idea of her coming from this billionaire background, because I feel like that family background puts some blinders on her as well as to how she thinks about solutions. And so, you know, it's kind of like, yeah, how she thinks about solutions and also how she thinks about power. Like the fact that, this is a thing that you see in privileged people is that they're like, I don't understand why I can't fix this problem because I've sort of had that ability with a lot of other things in my life. And then they sort of run into and eventually you hit a problem you can't actually solve yourself. And you can sort of have two responses to that. And Silvina has the violent one. And then you also, I think, have the issue that we see sometimes, and I don't want to like disparage an entire like group by saying the word like tech bro, for example, but it is true that you see, and this might have been industrialists in a different age, you do see people coming up with solutions that don't make any sense because they're a thought leader in one area and they try to transfer it to another, right? And people follow them because they were known for something successful in one area. And I think we're suffering from that problem in the climate crisis, climate change area as well, to some degree. You know? Yeah, well, absolutely. And like that is, and I think that like we always have this problem. And an amazing thing about it is that oftentimes those people do actually have, they have an opportunity to make change that other people couldn't. Because they have a lot of power, right? Because they have the money and they have the following. Money, and that's very interesting to me, that like the ability to sort of consolidate attention these days can result in a lot of actual good like or it can result in things getting done because you know it's not often that power is consolidated and that does kind of point to something about social media too, which is that there are ways in which social media cannot be of any use on some environmental issues, and then on other things I feel like it can be this great aggregator of attention that might actually move things a little bit, you know, at least. It's very difficult because it's hard to consolidate the attention without sort of the hottest possible take, right? Which is usually the simplest or the most controversial, you know, maybe the solution's really boring, you know. When I sort of like do like deep climate research, I'm like, oh boy, like the difference between this climate market and this climate market does not make me on fire. Right or even like just how the complexity of a situation accrues. Like there's been a lot on social media about that attempt to clean up the Great Garbage Patch.
Yeah.
But then there's a lot of data indicating there's a lot of creatures living in the Great Garbage Patch, and there's a lot of creatures that live on the surface of the ocean. So, you know, are you cleaning up garbage, or are you also liquidating a lot of marine life? You know, it's like you can't seem to win without actually going into the details and being cognizant of what those details are to find the solution sometimes.
Yeah. And I think that of course, like, we want to focus on the simple stories, especially when we're trying to motivate people to some kind of action, and thinking of the ocean as being clogged with garbage is, you know, we
distressing. It is.
The people sort of like look at, I think that a lot of people sort of focus a little bit too much on the plastic water bottle on their street and not enough on the systems that we have created for all kinds of reasons. So, I mean, it's not unusual for noir to not have a lot of super like characters that you really love. And I'm curious, do you find, because I get accused of this sometimes, do you find yourself kind of loving them anyway?
Well, I think it's I think I'm more interested in understanding characters, and I'm more interested in not necessarily growth, but I really often see the world in terms of the human world as a clash between bad and good imaginations, you know, in terms of, you know, everything we see around us, it's a built environment. It's the product of somebody's imagination, and some of it's absolute crap, right? Some of it indicates that someone really had something going.
Yeah.
So really, like, you know, does the character at the end of the day experience not growth necessarily, but a flourishing of imagination and ability to kind of get outside themselves to some degree. And then, you know, Jane is definitely not necessarily going to be sympathetic to a lot of people, but there's a lot of clues that she's unhappy with her life to begin with at the beginning of the novel, and she's looking for something to kind of break her life, that the life that she has would be wonderful for a lot of people, but it doesn't quite suit her. There's something about it that doesn't work for her, and I think that's why she seems happiest when she's kind of like on the run later in the novel in a weird way. But that's not going to settle well with some readers if they want an overtly sympathetic character, especially because Jane is telling her own story, and it's unlikely, even with self-reflection, that she's going to, you know, especially since when you find out where she's telling her story from, and who she thinks of as her audience, I guess.
Yeah.
So there's a certain amount of patience in that regard with regard to Jane, I think, that readers need, while hopefully the intricacies of the mystery kind of carry you deeper and deeper into the novel. I did like the physicality of Jane. I like the idea of Jane kind of exploding the noir tropes. I didn't really worry too much about the noir tropes being too standard or cliche, because I felt like Jane as a character was going to kind of explode them anyway, just by who she was. So that was kind of nice to relax into. But, you know, you could definitely make the case that Jane's a bad mother. That she's not really committed to her husband. And I think it's interesting to follow a character like that, and find the things in them that you might actually admire anyway. You know, so definitely this is a novel where, you know, I'm trusting the reader a lot on the character level, and it's not the way I always write. I mean, like a book like Born is very much about connection and about characters who care deeply about each other and are trying, even in a very wounded world, to still be together. And that's not really what Hummingbird Salamander is about. It's more about fractured characters who can't really connect, and they connect in these oblique ways through things like the hummingbird or an environmental cause and those kinds of things. So. Right.
And that, I mean, and that kind of, I don't know, like, it's interesting because Born is so like, it exists in, I don't know, it's almost like the ecosystem works more in like, or is more alive in Born, and so like that world does feel like, though very broken, of course, it like feels
like more vibrant,
that it is like rounded and living, rather than sort of like on, or it's like gone through its crisis and is headed in a new weird direction, whereas in this book it is about sort of like the fracture of all of these things that we have been relying on.
And it's a good point, because I don't think, without having written Born or Dead Astronauts, another novel set in the same universe, that I could have written Hummingbird Salamander, because I had in the back of my head that I've already written these other things with a different kind of balance in them. If Hummingbird Salamander was the first book I'd written about climate crisis, it might have felt a little different to me. Right. But I think having Born there as kind of like a weird anchor on this subject was helpful in writing Hummingbird.
So you don't seem to really write the same book twice, which seems to be the hard way to do it. You know, I love a lot of people who write detective fiction, and they create a character, and that character solves crimes. And at the beginning of the book, there's a crime, and at the end of the book, there's the detective is in dire peril, and then the crime gets solved. Why do you want to keep trying to create new muscles and hard times for yourself?
It's a good question. It's like, why do we get to the end of my mysteries and the crime turns out to be a totally different crime entirely, and no one has any idea why? No, but you know, I don't know. I mean, I think there are some themes that come through and again, even though it's not really intentional, that stuff is kind of subconscious, but I tend to feel most at home when I am at sea for some reason. So if I don't feel like
you're like Jane, you must be on the run.
Well, right. If I don't feel like I'm starting from scratch, like I've never written a novel before, somehow there isn't the interest level for me. And I do think I repeat themes, and there's certain motifs and things that come back. There always tends to be some subterranean element in my books. I don't know. So there is that.
I love I love underground. Very good.
And the next novels that I'm working on are set in the ravine behind my house, because I'm just lazy at this point, I think. And
like, I don't remember what anything else looks like.
Yeah. So just, just basically describe stuff in the ravine, and it worked for Annihilation, which is just me describing stuff on the hike I used to do. Not really, but it feels rejuvenating. And then I also do consciously think to myself, I know I'm going to be an old fart who repeats myself at some point, but I would like to delay that to some degree. And so I also do a lot of what you might call continuing education. I read a lot of books where I'm noting what the technique is, what the craft is that I haven't used before. I usually plug that into the thing I'm working on, even if I then toss it out again, just see how it functions. And I do try to kind of keep up with things to some degree. But yeah, it mostly just, I need that sense of mystery or adventure heading into the book, I guess.
Do you ever hit one of those things when you're doing your continuing education where you run into it and you think, God damn it, I can't do that?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's
definitely hit that all the time. What was it? I was reading a trilogy that takes, I think it's called Luna was the first one. Yeah. And he's just so good at fashion. And I was like, I'm never going to be able to have my characters wear cool clothes. Just can't. I feel the same way, like J.K. Rowling can't do music. Like every time there was ever music in Harry Potter, I was like, stop, turn around.
Stop. I have my limits, just to talk about one, it's like, I'm often praised for writing women characters, but Annihilation is women in isolation in a wilderness, not moving through society. And I think that, like, for example, Jane moving through some version of society before then hightailing it for the wilderness, is probably the limits of my powers in describing and in following that kind of a character that's not like me. So yeah,
it's interesting that
I did pick my spots on that. I don't just do every woman character that comes to me or something. And there's certain limits, and I think about that very intently as to what my own kind of blinkers or blind spots might be.
Yeah, I had the exact same experience where I realized that the problem of writing so the main character of both my novels is the same young woman, and she. I did not have a problem writing the way that she saw herself. I had a problem writing the way that the world saw her, because, like, I've never been a woman in society. And so like that was a real education as my beta and expert readers went through and were like, no.
I think there are two things there. One is like I always am pretty much aware of and kind of reevaluate what my like strengths at the kind of like the technique level too are as a writer, and that sometimes, because I get a lot of different ideas for novels, will just in general decide what I choose to do and what I don't, because it's like I'm more suited for this. Now, obviously, I'm still trying to push boundaries and stuff, but there's some things where I'm like, I'm really not suited to tell that story. Or then I look around, I'm like, oh, I'm relieved. Some other writer already kind of told that story, and they did it so much better than I could possibly have done. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's like you don't have to write every darn thing that comes into your head.
It would be a difficult book if it were to contain all of the techniques.
Right. I've tried. Dead Astronauts tried, but all of the techniques you're not supposed to use, rather.
Yeah. I don't know that the audience would love that. So how I think of you as fairly prolific. I don't know if that resonates with you at all.
I guess it's more that what happens is I'll have like 5 or 6 ideas for novels, and then I will think about them for several years, but it seems to be that the confluence of writing them comes hard on the heels of the last one. So, you know, like Born, before it was published, I actually thought about and wrote fragments of for 10 years. But then Dead Astronauts did come really fast. But, you know, Hummingbird Salamander was first conceived in 2016, you know, so, you know, they just kind of leapfrog each other. And then because of the publishing schedule, sometimes it does. But yeah, I guess in short, I am fairly prolific.
So you've got a bunch of things that are sort of kicking around in there. Do you have like a moment when you realize that this is going to be a book?
Yeah. And it's usually when I have some idea of the ending, initial situations, and some general outline of the characters. The ending might change later, but if I don't have that, I don't really begin to really think seriously about it. But then there's also the complexity level. So like the Ravine novel, I thought was going to be a short story. But then when I realized that the character was living in kind of the remains of the fallout from this really terrible period where someone tried to create kind of like an environmental commune across the top of the ravine in the 70s, and some of those people were still living there and still acrimonious and everything, suddenly I realized I had something much wider. And suddenly the character interactions were not short story character interactions, they were much more long haul. And then everything kind of opened up from there. So I'm having kind of I'm not comparing it to that, but I'm kind of having like a David Simon layering moment with this particular series, where it's like each novel builds on a different aspect of society within this ravine context. And that's very exciting because it's actually coming together in a slightly different way than a lot of the other novels have.
Cool. And do you ever give up once you hit that point?
Not really. I mean, I've never not finished something once I've reached that point. It might still be a decade. Like I believe I will finish this Ravine novel this year, but who knows? It might wind up being 5 years from now.
Yeah, interesting. What I have realized is that for me anyway, it's very much, I think like knowing the direction, knowing where we're headed is important. And you are also right that I was wrong about where I was headed, but it was good to have
that
in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. The main thing is I don't want to write too far into it before I know that the direction is changing. I really, more and more as I get older, I joke that I'm lazy, but really I've found that I can never really write a story too late. I can pick it too soon, but I've never reached a point where I start to write a story after thinking about it for quote unquote too long. It just doesn't really happen. So
right.
I mean, I could be wrong about that. I mean, I'm not the final arbiter, you know. It's like Goodreads is the final arbiter, etc. So it's like you picked this way too late.
folks who are listening, the Q&A thing is open. I haven't seen any questions in there yet. So if you want to ask one just showed up from Joe. Great. Oh my God, 2 just showed up. Are you very fast typists, or did we all just get very lucky? Or maybe Powell's hadn't approved them or something. Anyway, I'll read them and then we'll get to them. I won't hit you with them immediately.
Okay.
Do you think about the market for your book at all? Or do you think I want to write the book that I want to write?
Well, I can't really, I mean, I think that's the only disastrous thing for me is if I start thinking about the market until I've finished the book. And then when I finish the book, I do begin to think, well, where does this like fall on the genre, you know, contemporary mainstream spectrum? You know, who is going to read this? Is there something, you know, like with Dead Astronauts, it's an all experimental technique. It's probably not going to appeal to a general reader, and that's fine. It's not really built that way. But there's no way that I can really make the entry point gentler for the reader because it's not that kind of book.
Right. Whereas
there are books I've written where I've finished and I'm like, this is in this particular genre, in this particular subgenre, and I do need to both leave more space for the reader at the beginning of the book than I have, and I need to have a more gentle entry to it. And it doesn't hurt the novel. It's something, it's actually kind of integral to the structure. So I do think about the reader in that sense. And then I just try to have a total divide between, you know, my personal creativity and then what you might call the life cycle of the book itself. But I do think very hard once I've reached the point that I've finished edits of what's the strategic goal for this, you know, to reach the maximum audience. I think that's perfectly legitimate. I mean, I really do enjoy engaging on that level. It's another systems level type thing. And I really do like coming up with like imaginative PR campaigns for things where, you know, you're actually kind of like, you're kind of building something with the reader half the time if you do it right on social media. And I get a lot back from that. I got a lot, you know, it started with things like fan art for Annihilation, and then us actually actively kind of like encouraging that for Born, and then just kind of a sense of play on social media that I think is really important, and allows me to not have to feel like I'm trying to sell books, even though maybe some books will sell, but I'm also going to have some fun and creativity along the way, and I think readers appreciate that.
Yeah, I if anybody's watching and wants to know an author's absolute favorite thing, it is people engaging deeply and creatively with, I mean, I don't know if this is everybody, but like fan art is the best. I have a weird situation where there's about maybe 7 or 8 people who follow me on Twitter and are like active and communicating with me on Twitter who have taken the personas of characters in my books.
Oh, really?
I don't know who they are. Yeah. It's very weird. And so they are their character, and they are as obnoxious as their characters are. And then there's and weirdly, like the ones who are most successful are the most obnoxious characters because like obnoxious does well on Twitter. And then there's one guy who's me but with muscles, which is completely unrelated to any of them, which I find very strange.
But, you know, I mean, that does point to something about social media that doesn't get remarked on as much, is that you can have a lot of fun on it. You can play around on it. You can actually tell fun. Stories in addition to, I know it's not really that much fun, but you can carve out little corners of it from time to time.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So, I mean, you tend to, it is what you make of it. But of course, it is very difficult to control one's self, is what I have learned about social media. So I'm like, I have agency over this. I can control what Twitter is like for me, but I won't. So I think we both spend a fair amount of time on social media. I think that you have, oftentimes you carve out a nice little niche on Twitter that is just like, this is Jeff's corner, and we're going to talk about mushrooms and raccoons. But I think that it will inevitably bleed into the terrors of the day. Why do you do it?
Well, I mean, what I would say is that I didn't used to, until we came to this new house and started rewilding the yard and everything. You know, I didn't really post that much wildlife. There was much more of a balance with books and all kinds of other things. You know, and then there was this process that had started with Annihilation, where Annihilation actually got me invited to speak at a lot of interdisciplinary conferences and things that I hadn't before. And I learned a lot from that, but I also started to get all this different kinds of feedback on the novels as something other than just fiction, but, you know, what they were saying about the world. And then that kind of just got amplified when I started posting about wildlife and rewilding, because every week I would have people directly saying, oh, I stopped using pesticide and herbicide in my yard because of this, or I planted wildflowers in a pot on my balcony, and I wouldn't have done that without, you know, your Twitter feed and some of the stuff you post about rewilding. And so I guess what I would say is that there's an affirmation that comes from it where people really respond to it, where I can see that there's at least little differences. And, you know, maybe sometimes it's just the thing that pushes someone over the edge to do something, you know, with regard to their yard or like I said, wildflowers that they would have done anyway, but maybe that gave them a little reminder or something. And so it helps me a lot to stay unfrozen. It helps me to remind myself and others of the fact that there is still a very vibrant world out there. You know, you talk about the hope versus the non-hope, so to speak, and that's something I think is really important to remind people. Is as degraded as parts of the world are, we do still have something like a semblance of a working biosphere in a lot of places still, and it's really important to remember that, so we don't think that. I mean, I feel like there's sometimes an excuse in saying that everything's broken that allows the people who want to break more to break it without people caring as much as they should.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the messages that I hear people saying is if you have lost hope, then that's exactly what they want. So
right.
If you don't have hope that it can get fixed, then they have free reign to do whatever profit exploitation thing that they want to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Joe has this question. What kind of research went into the book? So there's there's natural history, there's taxidermy, there's I have a friend who is a female security consultant in that world, and it is a very stressful and weird job that is punctuated by like a lot of boredom and a lot of, as you say in the book, just like selling people things. But then also, like, of course, you are dealing with, and Jane rang true to me, having known a woman in that industry, and there aren't that many. So that was nice. And it made me feel like you had done some digging there.
Well, I mean, I think one thing that helps a lot on some of these novels, and also helped on Born in some ways with regard to the family dynamic, but here with regard to that, is that my wife, Anne, it's a different field, but she's actually, she was actually probably one of the first software managers and programmers, female programmers back in the late 70s, early 80s in the Southeast. And she would used to go to, God, I can't remember that huge software development conference, and she'd be one of a handful of women. And so, you know, obviously that's changed since then, but she was able, you know, I've, you know, she has relayed many an anecdote, and I've gotten a real sense of what that world can be like. So I basically transferred that to the security thing, did some research on security companies, but also, you know, just like in publishing, there's a certain amount of variation beyond what you might expect in certain companies within a certain industry. Maybe everybody thinks they're the industry standard, but actually there's a lot of mom pop shop stuff going on that's been institutionalized. So I probably took some liberties there. I'm glad that it felt real, but that's how I got there for that. And then for the Pacific Northwest, it's an area that's kind of a home away from home. But then I passed it by a few naturalist friends I know who know the area to make sure it was accurate. And I think there was one Zoom event I had where someone from that area said that everything but 2 details rang true. And it's like, that I think is as good as you can expect if you're not from an area. So I'll take that.
Yeah.
And then on wildlife trafficking, I just ran it by a wildlife trafficking expert afterwards, because I figured that they were pretty much criminal syndicates who, again, work in their own ways. So there's not gonna be like a manual for how to do wildlife trafficking. And it turned out I was right, that there's all kinds of different ways that it gets done.
No one's gonna be on Twitter being like, I'm a wildlife trafficker and you got that totally wrong.
Right. So, and then taxidermy didn't really play a large role in it, oddly enough, because it's not about taxidermy. It's just finding these two. Sure. So that's probably the area where I didn't feel like I had much of an obligation to do too much research. So you really see all these levels. You're like, what is it that I really need? And so the hummingbird and the salamander are really the biggest need to be authentic. And that's why an actual biologist, Dr. Megan Brown, created them. And the text in there that's about their lives is actually text she wrote, the way she wrote it.
Wow, that's cool.
And that was like the best way to do it. And then for me to react to the information she gave me, actually, I think helped the novel a lot.
This is from an anonymous person. You've mentioned a favorite hike in your own backyard. Is there a place in the world an ecosystem, a dream destination that you'd love to hang out in and see if book inspiration follows?
I think when I don't actually live in a place, it usually winds up that a kaleidoscope of bits and pieces wind up in some setting that's not particularly a realist setting, so to speak. And so
you need something deeper. You need like the time.
Yeah, and I think that's why Florida's come out so strongly in some of these later books in a way, you know, and why they're more oddly, I know this sounds weird, but they're more realistic than my prior work, which was more set in like fantastical cities and things that were amalgamations.
It's more realistic than Bourne.
More realistic than say, you know, the Ambergris novels that were set in an imaginary city that was kind of like all the places that I had known as a child mixed together. But you know, there are places like you know, certain Nordic wildernesses that I'd like to travel to, areas of South and Central America that I just haven't had an opportunity to. I don't know. I think one thing that I definitely would like to get to, and there was almost like an article reason to do it with parts of Alaska, which I've never been to. So I don't know. I tend to like extremes of temperature, not physically, but in terms of like the locations. I feel like there's a certain amount of, I don't know, strange beauty to such places. So I'm kind of drawn to very cold Arctic type places and very tropical places. I don't know. It's a tough one. There's so many I haven't visited. But then also, you know, when I go on book tours, I liaison with local naturalists, and they show me like their hidden treasures, maybe in the middle of a city. You know, so, and some of that has been absolutely amazing. So it's not really necessarily, it's sometimes about who's with you and showing you and more than a particular like amazing place, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. There's also just so much. Reality has a very high resolution. You know, you can spend a lot of time in one place and still not know everything. And it's
no, absolutely. I mean, until I got All Trails just on my phone, I didn't even realize there were some trails around town I hadn't done. So
nice. Yeah. I have also recently become I'm on the All Trails train. That's really cool. That was an interesting set of thoughts. And I also like, I do love, I mean, I haven't read any of your other work that takes place like in our world as it exists right now. I don't know how much of it there is, but is that a very different challenge from trying to like creating something that is very, very different from the world that we're in?
I think you know, the Ambergris novels, which were the ones that are most fantastical, least in our kind of reality. Really what I did is I just did extensive study of Venetian and Byzantine history as like the backdrop and the foundation of the city. And then we're really looking at like a cross-section like of 120 years that the characters' lives kind of span across. And so it's a different kind of way of looking at it. And where I found the eccentricities and the human foibles is just in examining different proponents of different kinds of historical theory, where you'll find a lot of stuff that reads like fiction and so it suggests narrative. And so that's a very different kind of thing than the later novels. But like even like Annihilation, which is considered so strange, or Authority, the next book, you know, 90% of the scenes are really just about weird human interactions in settings that are pretty much contemporary settings. So I'm pretty familiar with writing a scene that doesn't have any element of strangeness in it.
Sure.
But then people will mostly remember, you know, that's the stuff that allows the uncanny stuff to work, really.
Right.
But the uncanny stuff is what they'll remember. They'll remember that Control in Authority turns this corner for the third time and there's a wall where there was no wall before, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Not the, you know, so I mean, you know, that's just kind of the way it works. On the Ravine novel, it's kind of fun because I've got like a scene that's actually deeply uncanny, but you don't know it until like later in the novel, where there's this lunch with 5 or 6 characters talking. And I'm not really known for multi-character lunch scenes, but it's nice to be able to do a mundane scene like that actually has all these secret underpinnings, you know. So.
All right. Well, now we're all curious.
Are you?
Yeah,
I'm not to the point where I'm like really doing a good job of pitching, on a novel I haven't finished yet.
Yeah. You don't need. Well,
it's all about lunch scenes, ravines.
Well, the idea that there is something deeply uncanny in a very normal interaction, and you don't know it.
You don't know it
when it's happening. That is very enticing to me.
Yeah.
But so I think two different people have asked about cover art. And I do very much like your cover art. It does seem like somebody's working hard on it and thinking a lot about it. Are you involved in that process?
Well, I do have final say on the covers. I would say that most of the time these days, there seems to be this positive feedback effect, starting with the Annihilation covers, where everyone wants to kind of outdo do that, and also sets a tone of something vibrant, rich, and colorful, which is not, obviously Annihilation could have just been like a black and white cover with a lighthouse on it, and it might have really sold much worse than it did with this vibrant green cover. So yeah, a lot of thought goes into it. Most of my books are out from FSG and MCD, and they do an amazing job. And so it's more or less some version of the same art teams and design teams working on it. I have, every once in a while, there's something that doesn't work. Like the first Annihilation cover was like a chia pet kind of boar with Southeast Asian vegetation kind of like sprouting out of the boar. And that just didn't really work for me. It looked more like a Lord of the Flies cover. Also from a distance, it looked, because of the boar snout, looked very, very unfortunate in silhouette. And so I had to say no to that. And I'm very glad I did. But then ever since that point, I don't think there's been a time where it's been more like, just, can we try a different color scheme or something? But I've been very fortunate. All the foreign editions too are just absolutely stunning.
That's so cool. My cover is so like easy to port that almost all of my foreign editions use the exact same sort of vibe, and and I'm like very jealous of all of my brother's like weird ass Japanese edition. This is an interesting question from Cassidy. Speculative fiction stories provide audiences with a way of imagining new futures and consider problems in new ways. I think you were talking about this in terms of like the laboratory earlier. Are you particularly conscious of the types of environmental stories you tell with respect to hope and despair in an effort to help drive the popular consciousness toward progress?
Yeah, well, I think a good example is Dead Astronauts, where I'm really trying to make the point that there are sometimes things that move the needle that we see as failures, in part because we're using capitalist metrics on our environmental efforts. And I know even just in local politics here that sometimes there'll be some kind of protest or whatever about a certain environmental issue where it may fail, but it may affect local government in terms of the next thing that comes around. Like they may modify their behavior because of it, and the next thing that comes around may be better. So I think it's really important that we understand and know that we're never going to necessarily have a perfect success. If that makes any sense. And that it's okay to still, that there are still moments that feel like failure that can lead to something. Oh crap, Hawk just, sorry.
Awesome.
Hawk just, I think, grabbed a squirrel off the deck. I'm not sure exactly what just
Holy
happened.
moly.
But it was a really big bird. Anyway, sorry. So now there are 3,999 squirrels in the yard. So things like that I do think about, in the middle of writing something. And I also think a lot about someone who's absolutely amazing in this state from an area you used to live in Orlando, Anna Escamani, who's in the Florida House of Representatives. And I asked her, how do you keep going? Because she's like this dynamo, and like she's just going on to the next thing and the next thing. And she said, well, that's the secret. It's like I don't spend a lot of time on the failures. I go on to the next thing. I'm always making myself a moving target by always moving on to the next thing. And keeping busy on it, and that actually makes it harder for the people who want to stop me to keep up with me. So I thought that was kind of interesting too.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So it's been really interesting to read that you've started to get involved in like the sort of structural ways that actually decisions are made in like your area, in your state, in our country. And I wanted to ask you if you have sort of a cognitive model of change, like how does change occur?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, it's unpredictable to me, at least in terms of what my activities are, like exactly what's going to ever make the difference necessarily. Sure. All I can do is think in terms of systems. I did actually benefit quite a bit for having a job for 10 years where I was doing some business process analysis and stuff. And I think that really helped me a lot in terms of thinking about systems. But, I think, a sense of, I think what's really, really key is a clear, practical sense of what you control, what you have some control over, and what you have no control over, and understanding what those things are. Because if you don't understand what those things are, you can get very frustrated and very frozen when things don't go the way you would like them to. Then I think there's the overlay of what's global, national, regional, and local, which doesn't always mesh in the ways you would think with what you have control over. You have to really think about that. Then there's how much time and energy beyond the basic things you need to do to make a living and everything else you can devote to this stuff, and being realistic about that. So this may not be completely answering your question, but it's like how I set the foundation for how I personally am trying to affect change, and being realistic about those things. And then, what you're passionate about and how you best feel like you can move the levers. So for example, and it feels presumptuous to even say this, but I could run for local office. I don't know how well I would do, but I do know that I do have a pretty good reputation in this community. And I do think I could give somebody a run for their money. Sure. But then I would no longer be a novelist. And the question of the trade-off there is, would I actually be losing some effectiveness in how I can potentially influence stuff by giving up the thing I'm best at to do a thing I'm probably not as good at, but I might be able to affect some local change, but I might not. So it's like, what is the level at which you do this? And then, I think we've already talked about this a little bit, is like knowing what kind of thing you're doing. Is it going to be effective in this particular way? Like boycotts are sometimes very effective with regard to certain companies, may be less effective in other ways for other things. I don't know. It feels like there's this tiered approach that you have to keep thinking about. And I try to have several different things going at once. So there's property we're trying to conserve in Tallahassee. There's systemic change as well. There's political candidates I'm trying to support because I know just one different city commissioner, and we have a whole new way of looking at development in town. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Well,
really,
I mean, it's a big question. I think that last bit is so interesting that, like, when I think that once people start to get a little bit involved in something more specifically, when they start to have a little bit more knowledge of how something functions outside of just this is all very bad. Yeah. So you can't, like, if you can let this is all very bad motivate you to somewhere, whether that is, a city council meeting or a deeper understanding of, like actually sort of engaging with the people who are trying to solve the problems, which might just be listening to them. Right. But it might be listening to them so much that you start to become one of them. Right. And are, you're sort of thinking to yourself, well, like if there is this solution to these problems, like aquifer recharge, that's like, it's conservation, but it's also like helping out with farmland. There's ways to sort of build a consensus around this specific thing that like maybe you become a person who's like an advocate for that thing in your community. And I think that the reality remains that every change, that like every like change in a human system is made by humans. Now it's made in amongst a lot of constraints that are not humans, but like with that like change happens by people making change, and so like the agency of the individual, I think is important and sometimes disregarded.
And I think also there's two other things, which is that unfortunately local government action is going under the radar because of local newspapers being in the tank. So you're seeing a lot of what I would call a lot more systemic corruption that then, because it's kind of codified, people who are engaged in it can say this isn't actually corruption.
Right.
And that is affecting the environmental stuff quite a bit. And then there's also the fact of like being careful to not always be on issues where you're on your back foot. Like you're going to always have them, but like it was great that you know, I wrote an editorial about this. I think actually the petition we passed around helped a lot. We actually got this gas station that was going to be built in a way where it would pollute Wakulla Springs nearby to not be built, right? That helped a lot. There were other things that happened, but we definitely played a part in that. But that's an example of being on your back foot, having to deal with something that should never have been proposed in the first place. And so I think also, like, you know, thinking about how you can get on the front foot, because that's what we need to do, is really important, even as you're having to fight all these kind of rear guard battles to some degree over things that really should never have happened in the first place. I don't know. Right.
And but then there's also, I mean, I like one of my favorite, like one of the goings on in Montana is like, how do you reconnect fragmented habitat? Because there's more large chunks of undeveloped world out here, but they are chunks, you know? And so how do you find a way to get those islands reconnected to each other so that, you know, so that like two grizzly bears can have sex,
can actually,
right?
Know? Yeah.
like we're just like we want most people would be you to meet.
Most people would be in favor of that, you would think, you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's expensive. Like it costs money, and
sure.
You know, they so like, but that's like, to me, that's not the back foot. To me, that's charging forward. Where you're saying like, let's
definitely. And there's something like that here, and there's this Florida wildlife corridor idea that's being pushed, and there's a website around that name, I think. And it's a good example because it is front foot. They may not succeed, but in the process, even if they don't succeed, they'll have preserved hundreds of thousands of acres in the process. So I see that as a good, you know, example of that as well. So.
Yeah. All right, I've got one final question for you. It just came in from Mitchell. I appreciate Mitchell for asking this one. Jeff, I fell asleep while I was reading Annihilation in the hammock underneath an oak tree in my backyard, and I awoke a chitinous cocoon metamorphosing into I know not what. Any advice?
Well, I think really if you go to iNaturalist, you may be able to find out what you are. I wouldn't disclose your exact location just in case there's some other issue, but...
There's an app for that.
I don't usually say that. Like, I've never said that before in my life. Like, I actually don't believe there's an app for everything, but I think that's your best bet at this point.
All right.
After falling asleep while reading a book, that's totally natural. So
yes, waking up a chitinous cocoon also does happen to some organisms.
It does, apparently.
Usually not to people. Oh, I don't know how we end this thing, but I feel as if it is time to end the thing. We've got our host is back. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Absolutely. I'm here, don't worry. So, well, thank you guys so much for joining us today. And it was great talk and great questions and all that kind of stuff. This is the book, Hummingbird Salamander. So check this out. There's a link on Powell.com to purchase that, or just put the title into Powell.com search. Also check out Hank's book too as well. And and while you're there, check out our list of upcoming events in the store and virtual events just like this one. And thanks for joining us today. Thanks so much, you guys, for that.
Oh yeah, that was a lot of fun. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Nice to see you both.
Good time.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks so much. See ya.